War Pugs. So, as evident, I am still getting over this junk. It is what it is. But today, I wanted to check out a request from Dirthright. And Dirthright requested that I take a look at PancreasNoWork's Catachan Jungle Fighters. Now, there's been another request that has come through Patreon recently that I was very interested in. I've actually reached out to the creator to see if they'd be okay with it. But I really wanted to check out this one on Hive Cities as done by an actual architect. So, I'm waiting to hear back about that because I'm really interested in doing that. I'm really interested in checking that out. But, until then, we have the Catachan Jungle Fighters. And guys, I'm really trying to get to the backlog. I was really, really optimistic going into Christmas about being able to address everything, and then all of a sudden, this happened. So, I'm doing the best that I can. Once my voice is recovered, I was so hyped coming off of Christmas. I finished the lore video. I was getting back into that. I was script writing again, and then this happened, and I literally lost everything I was trying to build up. So, I do apologize. It is what it is. So if I sound like 50 miles of gravel washed down with some acid, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to actually try to get through all this. Don't know if I'll be able to. We'll find out. But guys, Catachan Jungle Fighters. Why? I sound like a knockoff Alex Jones at this point when he normally talks. That's so wild to say. It's like and aliens and New World Order and I just want to tell you I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that make the frogs gay. But you hear that? Anyhow. Okay, I'm an idiot. I'm shutting up. I'm just gonna play this. Let's go. PancreasNoWork's Army of Rambos, the Catachan Jungle Fighters, people that come from a world that is literally a hellhole.
Deathworlds are fun places. Fun in the same way RimWorld is fun when Randy is off his meds. Generally, they're the absolute last places you want to be living on, be it Krieg and its nuclear wastelands, or Nocturne, where every few years the entire planet turns into Bowser's castle. Some of them are sneaky Deathworlds. Some of them from space look like they might not be a bad place to live at all, and then you land on them and it turns out that not only is the planet alive, but actively hates you. Such is the case with today's video, Catachan and its Jungle Fighters. I don't think they're my favorite impaired.
You see, I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. I've always said Catachan. Catachan is something else I've heard. I heard it pronounced this one weird way back in the day, and it popped into my head, and then the pronunciation went out the window. Sorry, guys.
Imperial Guard Regiment, but they're definitely up there. They're cool in the same way that Rambo is cool. Aggressively 80s, aggressively machismo, and reading or watching anything involving it involves turning off the higher part of your brain to make room for machine gun noises.
Yes.
All of these are good things, by the way. They're a holdover from 40k where things were silly as the norm, rather than overdramatic stories about Primarchs and Astartes and all that crap I can't be bothered to care about being the norm. So please, turn on the song Welcome to the Jungle, make a bowl of popcorn, and listen while I tell you about the Imperial Guard Regiment from the worst planet on the Imperium and the absolute crapsack of a world they call home. I would play the song myself for you in the video, but I don't want my entire bloodline copyright struck for all of time. But before I start telling you about the Jungle Fighters, look at this picture of them. What do you notice about them? Other than the fact they've got laser weapons, which isn't noteworthy because this is 40k and everyone has laser weapons, they're very clean shaven. Not a beard in sight, not one follicle that isn't on top of their heads.
Right. And
that's almost certainly because they use Henson Shaving, the sponsor of this video. Henson Shaving is based...
My guy, that segue was spot on.
On three key principles, the first one being precision. Now I feel the best way to highlight this is to explain what normally happens when I shave myself. When I normally shave, it looks like someone got caught in a saw trap. If I have 2 or less cuts, I consider it to be a win. With the Henson razor, there was not a single cut on my skin, and my face feels as smooth as silk. The blades are only 0.0013 inches thick, which is less than half the thickness of a human hair, and it's built to support the blade in such a way that it's both securely held and as little of the blade as possible touches your face, preventing all those nasty cuts and scrapes you may otherwise get. And I'm most definitely not alone, because only 2 out of 100 razors they sell are ever returned. If that number isn't enough for you, I should inform you that this company has also made parts for the Mars rover and International Space Station. I think we can safely assume.
I'm glad to see. Now, something that he isn't telling you about this, he might not tell you, but I did see this on a Fat Electrician video, because Fat Electrician was also sponsored by Henson. They don't want you to use their product unless you absolutely find it useful. And, yeah, I am very happy. That's the kind of sponsor that I like to work with. And I actually turned down one today for some, guys, people have tried to send me, talk about our exercise bike. Have you seen my fat ass? Have you seen me? At all. I mean, look at me. Let's see. I got one today. Hold on a second. I actually got one today where I'm pretty sure they wanted me to sell UV face masks. They wanted to sponsor me to do, let me see, hold on. The red light treatment mask. Have you seen me? Have you noticed me? Between the exercise bike and that, I was like, okay. I did get one that I might consider in the future, but they need to get back with me because I sent them all. But I'm shutting up. I haven't been able to talk to you guys in days. Sorry. Shutting up.
Assume they know how to make quality stuff. The next is sustainability. The razor and package have no plastic in them, period. This means they're environmentally friendly and recyclable. And even if you love pollution and throwing car batteries into the ocean is your favorite pastime, this also means that a Henson AL13 razor can legitimately last you decades. You've probably heard the phrase, last X you'll ever need to buy, but a Henson razor may damn well be the last one you ever need to buy. And last but certainly not least, for a consumer like you and me, the cost of the thing. Cheap as you could possibly want. Over 2 years, it'll run you about $88, which is just a third of what you'd likely be spending otherwise. After that, it costs $3 to $5 a year, depending on how often you have to refill the razor. $5 max for a whole year. If money talks, then the Henson razor is screaming at the top of its lungs about how good of a deal this is. Whatever your shaving needs are, you can't go wrong with a Henson shaving razor. It'll last you forever, cost next to nothing, and it'll be the smoothest shave you could possibly want. Get one today and be set for a lifetime. Alright, now I can welcome you all to the jungle.
Yay.
The Catachan jungle fighters have their origins before the Imperium of Man ever actually existed. Colonized during the Dark Age of technology, probes sent to look at the planet found it to be a pleasant little blue and green orb, just like the Earth. This was a lie, a prank by the planet, if you will. Catachan isn't like Earth. It's like if Lustria from Fantasy was an entire planet and less magical. Whether or not that makes it more or less impressive is up to you, but for what it's worth, Catachan was able to get that deadly without the help of psychic frogs.
Yep.
These Dark Age of Technology colonists went to land in what they assumed was a nice place to live when there was an emergency on their ships and they had to crash land. Two horrible realizations struck them. They couldn't repair their ships and were stuck there now, and the planet they were stuck on was a leafy green hell. The initial colonization of the planet wasn't a colonization at all. It was a siege scenario for hundreds of years against the jungle itself. Leaving their colony ship was a great way to get themselves eaten or worse, and while there's no specific number, I presume the percentage of them who survived could be measured in the single digits. To give you a taste of what this place is like, there's over a dozen plants and animals on the planet that would qualify it as a death world on their own, but in the name of expediency, I'll just give you my top 5 picks. We've got the brain leaf, a small tree which can attach its leaves to you and take over your body. What purpose this serves the plant, I don't know, but there's theories it's a tyrannid organism that was cut off from hive fleets, so it could just be built to be the worst thing ever on purpose.
Right.
It does kind of sound like the prototype to a gene sealer cult, so maybe that's why this horrible thing exists. Sharing a spot, up next we have have the Catachan man-trap and Venus man-trap. Both are Venus flytraps on steroids that instead of waiting for food to land on them, make the prey come to them instead in their own horribly violent ways. Up next we have the vein worms, which numb the region they bite so you can't feel it, then lay eggs in your bloodstream so they can eat your brain, heart, and bones. There is of course naturally no cure for this. There's the Catachan barking toad, which when threatened explodes hard enough with acid strong enough to melt through every single armor in the galaxy. Incidentally, this means that the best way to kill a custodian is to somehow lure him to Catachan and then agitate one of these things enough. And then we finally have my personal favorite, the strangle plant, which if you can believe, doesn't actually strangle you. Instead, it traps you in its vines so you can die via dehydration. This of course isn't all the horrible things on Catachan, just my favorite ones. If you couldn't tell, this planet sucks. I think I would rather live on Cadia.
Accurate.
And Cadia is a chaos-corrupted asteroid field in the lore right now. Of course, as you can probably imagine, this had the side effect of turning every single Catachanian, or whatever you want to call them, into mini space marines. Constantly surviving in the worst environment possible meant that by the time the Imperium was formed and Catachan rediscovered by humanity at large, the planet was filled with the kind of person who could arm wrestle a grizzly bear and win. Granted, the planet has a mortality rate of 50% by the time you would reach adulthood, so even in modern 40k, it's still a brutal thing just to stay alive. Pardon me everyone, I actually read that wrong. It has a 50% mortality rate for reaching 10 years old, and out of that group, only 50% make it to adulthood. If my math is correct, which granted is a big if, that means that even after 10,000 years of living on this planet, it has a fatality rate of 75% before you become an adult.
That means you're doing a lot of... Yeah, you're having a lot of sex, apparently.
Much like Cadia, Catachan
Replacement rate of this population is insane.
and children also learn to shoot before they can walk. The jungle has to be regularly beaten back, and occasionally hordes of animals will consume settlements, so everyone left has to move and settle somewhere else, which of course involves fighting through more of this hellscape.
Yep.
Naturally, everything is also filled with disease and poisons as well.
Because why not?
Normal jungles are breeding grounds for that kind of stuff, and Catachan is anything but a normal jungle. There's even theories that the planet itself is the way it is because it's the remnants of the vanguard of a Tyranid invasion who were disconnected from the hive mind, although to my knowledge that's been moved away from in recent years. That being said, a White Dwarf magazine lets you take the Catachan Devil as Xenid and Tyranid armies in Old Warhammer, so while nowadays it's not canon, it was pretty much all but stated to be true at one point with that.
Right.
I couldn't find an exact date for when the Catachans were rediscovered, but eventually the Imperium realized that, hey, maybe the people in this hellscape of a world could make decent soldiers. So they started demanding tithes, which I presume is one of the few occasions where people actually wanted to be conscripted into the Imperial Guard. Think about it. The Imperium gets soldiers who could stare a Chaos Space Marine in the face and say without lying they fought worse as a child, and the average citizen of Catachan gets a chance to be literally anywhere in the galaxy that isn't Catachan. For once in this setting, the Imperium's constant state of war is a win-win for everyone. Thus were the Catachan Jungle Fighters formed and proceeded to kick ass across the galaxy. The Jungle Fighters themselves are an interesting bunch. As a general rule of thumb, this entire army is 80s action movie protagonists. They wear little more than basic combat fatigues with a shirt being optional, and they of course have a specialty in jungle warfare. If the planet you're fighting on is green, humid, and miserable, you want the Jungle Fighters. Their favorite weapons are things like flamethrowers and machetes.
I'm trying not to sneeze, guys. Sorry, that's why I'm making all these weird facial expressions.
That are probably closer to being bastard swords than actual machetes,
Yeah.
because there's nothing better for dealing with the ever-encroaching jungle than chopping it into pieces and setting it on fire. They also generally don't play well with other guard regiments. For example, they're so balls to the wall that if they want to call you a pussy, they don't just call you a pussy. They call you Acadian. The planet that was right next to the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years and was the only thing holding back endless tides of demons and traitors from Imperial space, and they consider everyone who lived on it to be bitches. Whether or not you agree with that is up to you, but do yourself a favor and go to the wiki for the full list of horrible things that exist on Catachan. Even if you don't agree with them by the time you're done reading the list, you'll probably at least understand where they're coming from. At least in Cadia you always knew where the enemy was coming from and what it was.
Yep.
It was coming from the gaping anus in the sky and was either a demon or an evil Master Chief. A walk through the woods in Catachan, meanwhile, can result in anything from a clear and refreshed mind to becoming fertilizer for the galaxy's sweatiest armpit, so I don't fault them for thinking everyone else is a bit of a pushover. Additionally, for some more quirks they have, do yourself a favor and look up the term fragging if you aren't familiar with it already. That's what Catachan soldiers tend to do to commissars assigned to their regiments. The soldiers on the planet as a whole are all loose cannon cops who don't play by the rules, and don't really do things like organization or having a chain of command if the person in charge hasn't proven they can 1v1 a bloodthirster. Combine that with the fact that they view everyone who didn't grow up on Catachan as weak whittle baby wabies, and they tend to dispose of commissars who try to throw their weight around.
Yeah, you don't want to show up with a red sash trying to talk to the jungle fighters like they ain't shit. You're not... On a world like that, they deal with practicality. And they ain't got time for you. Not only that, Sly Marbo comes from this planet. And whatever planet Sly Marbo came from, had to be an absolute nightmare.
The only exception to this that I could find is a gentleman by the name of Colonel Grease, who was a commissar who took command of the Catachan 2nd Regiment when the previous one came down with a terrible case of death. He was understanding and willing to work alongside the regiment, reformed their strategy to revolve around chimeras, which is actually quite effective, and overall was a commissar who would lead by example and not splattering the brains of the first guy to suggest retreating over the jungle floor. They actually loved the guy. He was also fond of abhumans, specifically ogrins, and had an ogrin bodyguard named Nork. Nork's a cool dude and still fighting to this day, and Colonel Grease managed to actually reach retirement. Proper retirement, not dying in a ditch somewhere. But yeah, aside from this guy, Catachan doesn't like outside officers and commissars telling them what to do, and they tend to showcase why friendly fire isn't whenever one tries to push them around. I'm sure they'd like Kane too, but that's a meaningless statement because everyone likes Kane.
Yeah.
Catachan soldiers are also just straight up better than the average one in the galaxy. They're taller, stronger, and smarter than the average human. This is because the gravity on Catachan is actually significantly higher than Earth's gravity, which scientifically means they should be shorter than the average person who uses Warhammer and Science is for Losers. And since it's such a shit heap, the inhabitants have to learn to think fast unless they want to be devoured. They're so bulked up that it's to the point that the average Catachan soldier is nicknamed a mini ogrin by other guardsmen. But you know what? They've got a fierce warrior culture and no small amount of pride to go with it. Their planet has higher than average gravity, and they're renowned across the galaxy as some of the best fighters around. Catachan doesn't have humans on it, and they aren't ogrins either. These are just Saiyans. I'm not alone in seeing the parallel in this, am I? Like, I know I have Dragon Ball brain rot, but this comparison is apt, I swear to God this time.
No, the soldiers of Catachan are just on a... As far as regiments of renown goes, it's something very special. There was another regiment of renown. I'm going to shut up because I doubt I'll get the story entirely. But I hope he tells a story about when the Catachans fought the Dragoons.
Their latest developments come from the Great Rift opening. While Cadia was busy getting butt-pounded, plenty of refugee guard regiments and other ships arrived on Catachan to regroup and find a safe harbor. A real shame they went to Catachan for that. The Catachan forces actually made all but one guard regiment stay in orbit, because they said that none of them were tough enough to survive on the planet below. The one they led on was known as the Tuloshan Grey Company. I guess these guys were all ripped as hell, so the jungle fighters felt they were tough enough to land, presumably so they could all have Full Metal Alchemist-style flexing competitions. Before the Catachan soldiers could greet them all as their besto friendos, however, it turns out they were all traitor guardsmen whose home planet fell because they summoned a boatload of demons on it. Combine that with the fact the planet was caught in the Great Rift, and Catachan was forced to contend with an invasion of demons and face the same doom as Cadia. And then they all died. That's it. The Tuloshans died within a few days, the demons within a few months, and then Catachan just went back to normal. Every time the chaotic forces tried to make a move, the Catachans would strike from the jungle before disappearing. When the traitors and demons gave chase, the jungle would eat them. And unless I misunderstood what I read, or what I read was wrong, the jungle also ate the demons.
Yep.
It didn't banish them, it ate them.
Yep.
No wonder the Catachan soldiers think everyone else is a pushover. This planet could hold off a demon invasion without anyone living on it. By the time the Indominus Crusade rolled around, Catachan was completely cleared of corruption. Gilliman presumably just stared at the reports for a bit before shrugging his shoulders and accepting the one piece of good news he had in years by that point. By the time he moved on, his forces had been bolstered to be larger than when he had started. And that just about brings us up to speed on the Catachan jungle fighters and the crapsack of a planet they call home. But hey, they've got minis, they've got rules for those minis, let's do or don't Catachan. For lore positives, if you like your army to be a cut above the rest, then you want these lads. Between their attitudes towards other guardsmen and their actual skill level, Catachans are elites in both actual skill and their personal beliefs. There's something to be said about an army that can talk a big game and back it up, so if you like that sort of thing but don't want to go all the way up to the super soldiers of Warhammer 40k, then the Catachan jungle fighters are the force for you. If you're really big into guerrilla warfare as a concept, then this is also the army for you.
Yes.
Because from individuals to entire armies, Catachan jungle fighters excel at it. Anything from perfectly camouflaged tank divisions to nighttime raids and waiting in the shadows. They're an entire planet's military worth of stealth builds, except the stealth build can also go incredibly loud when the time calls for it. Also, if you like the sillier aspects of Warhammer, Catachan is one of the only bets to survive from that era of 40k largely unchanged. Space Marines aren't beaky cops and cool sunglasses armor anymore, there's no more Inquisitors named Obi-Wan, Sherlock, Clausel, but
Have I not said this a dozen times?
Catachan in all its 80s action movie glory is here to stay. Last lore positive for the mini do or don't here is that Catachan isn't a lore faction that's going to be going anywhere. Not by my estimations, at least. The Catachan jungle fighters are a popular guard regiment, and even beyond that, they've been surviving on what has multiple times been referred to as the deadliest death world in the Imperium for longer than there's been an Imperium of Man. For both meta reasons and lore reasons, they're going to stick around, and I'm willing to bet that's the same case for Tabletop. Way to transition to the next segment there, myself. Thanks, myself. You're welcome, myself. Tabletop positives, the average Catachan jungle fighter hits its strength 4 in melee when they charge or have been charged. They also have the scout special rule with 6 inches, meaning after you deploy them, you get to move 6 inches for free. Might not sound like too much, but that can be the difference between solidly holding an objective because you got there first, or committing dozens of guardsmen and pieces of armor to a slog you aren't even sure if you can win. The Catachan jungle fighters additionally have quite the array of special characters. Colonel Ironhand Strachan has a pretty solid stat block, buffs the melee of units he's attached to, and his bonuses to fighting monster units. Fitting to his lore, where he beat a landshark to death after it had eaten about half of his torso, all the while he was sneaking up on an Eldar army. Sergeant Harker shoots real good, and if your opponent shoots the unit he's in from more than 12 inches away, they take a -1 to their hit roll. Colonel Grease may not be around anymore, and Nork may not be a Catachan exclusive, but what he is one hell of a bodyguard, giving the entire command squad a feel no pain save of 4 up. And if the command squad fights in melee, once you're done with the fighting, he can headbutt an enemy for up to 6 mortal wounds. It's worth noting that while it's incredibly unlikely to happen, with his 6 attacks at 2 damage each and the headbutt ability, he can one-shot Angron with 2 wounds to spare. And finally, Sly Marbo, the funny guy I imagine most of you were waiting for me to mention. In the lore, he's the prime Rambo in an army of Rambos. Sly Marbo got his start when his 9 brother Marbos were killed by orcs. Rather pissed at this, he walked into the orc war camp, cut off the war boss's head, and then returned back to base with it like a cat showing you the bird it killed. He's taken on an entire task force of orcs, chaos space marines, and more, and left no survivors, and this includes Titans.
I was waiting for him to mention the Titans.
You can also find a list of Chuck Norris jokes about him online, only with Chuck Norris replaced with Sly Marbo. While his stat block in-game doesn't nearly live up to that hype, he can be deployed anywhere farther than 9 inches from the enemy, enemies shooting at him take a penalty to it, and enemies farther than 12 inches from him just can't shoot at him, period. Sly Marbo may not be a one-man army, but by God, your enemy can be pulling their hair out trying to deal with the man. His weapons aren't a joke either, and while he probably won't be soloing war bosses and chaos lords like in lore, he can take out smaller enemy units pretty reliably, especially if you use him against more fragile armies like the Eldar.
He's quite literally, Sly Marbo in the lore has quite literally wiped out entire armies by himself.
He's also just straight up Sylvester Stallone. Sly isn't one of Stallone's nicknames, and Marbo is an anagram of Rambo. Not subtle at all, but again, we're in goofy fun 40k land right now, so it's perfect. But with the good comes the bad, and that's no exception here. For lore negatives, it'll be brief at least. To start us off, Catachans can pretty easily come off as a bunch of assholes.
They can.
No one likes the guy who won't stop bragging even if he's earned it, and that's Catachan to a T. Remember, they use Cadian as an insult. That's at the very least unsporting. It can be fun to play a braggart, but beware that you're still playing a dickhead in the lore. There's also the matter of them being Imperial Guardsmen, and therefore always more subservient to Space Marines, despite the fact that they're quite frankly far more qualified than half of the Astartes could ever dream of being. That'll get annoying fast after you've read their lore and wonder why the hell they aren't the ones the Imperium defaults to when things are getting desperate, rather than...
Flat out, any initiation trial that a Space Marine chapter has at this point pales in comparison to going to the convenience store in Catachan. The fact that they don't use that world to recruit is a crime.
than another Ultramarine successor chapter to get exploded. But I like these guys, so I'm not going to say too many bad things about them here. Maybe it's because I watched Predator not too long before I was making this video, but something about the horrifying killer lurking in the shadows of the jungle being an army of 80s action heroes makes it hard for me to criticize them from a lore perspective. The tabletop cons will also be brief, but that's because it doesn't take me very long to explain why I think that Catachan is complete garbage on the tabletop right now. First off, the basic jungle fighters. They're an always but the scout rule and their charge bonus completely normal guardsmen. If you are playing guard, a bonus to charging is perhaps the last thing you want a bonus for.
Right.
The guard isn't a melee army. Giving the guard a bonus to not just melee, but specifically charging into melee, and only that, is going completely against what the guard is good at. And aside from that, they're infinitely less versatile than every other option you have for guardsmen. Kriegers and Cadians get way more options for weapons, while the jungle fighters get to take a single flamethrower along with their lasguns, and that's it. In fact, the Deathcore of Krieg can take power weapons and chainswords, meaning that they're actually significantly better in melee than Catachan units are.
Right.
Sure, maybe you can catch a player off balance once when your guardsman hit one of his weaker units at strength 4 instead of strength 3, but that's it. Cadians and Kriegers are better, the Tempestus Scions are better. The only thing Catachan really shines at is their special characters, which are good, but probably not game-changing on their own, with the possible exception of Sly Rambo if you use them well and get some lucky hits.
True.
And fun fact, I don't think the Catachan Command Squad or Heavy Weapons team actually have rules for 10th edition. They have models on the store page, you can buy them, but I couldn't find any datasheets for them. So your cool jungle fighters technically don't get any of the support they're supposed to have. Worst of all is that you can no longer buy Sergeant Avery Johnson for your Catachan army, which is a complete tragedy. Seriously though, tell me this isn't Sergeant Johnson. I'm sure it was supposed to be Carl Weathers from Predator, but when I look at him, all I can think of is this guy giving a speech to some Cadians about how in his day the jungle fighters didn't even have lasguns. Just...
And he knows what the ladies like.
2 sticks and a rock they had to share. Either way, it's a moot point because you can't get the bastard any longer. And to top it off, their models look like complete dog shit. Marble looks good, Strachan looks good, and the rest of the characters look alright, including the command squad. But the average jungle fighter, which would make up most of the models in this army, looks like they've grown up eating nothing but lead-based paint for nourishment. A couple of years ago, they were just the worst of an army that had aging problems across the board. Now with the guard getting its infantry ranges refreshed for the most part, you can really tell that whoever painted these models for the store page was drunk on absinthe when he showed up to work that day. The Gaunt's ghost models do a better job of looking like guerrilla jungle fighters than the actual jungle fighters do. So overall, Catachan is an awesome piece of lore with some models and rules that really fail to do him justice. While I of course steadfastly want them to update Eldar more than anything else, or more honestly, just release the fucking old world models for pre-order or something already, if GW is going to default back to ignoring Xenos now that the shiny new Necron Lord came out, then I hope the next batch of fellas to get an update is these guys. They deserve it more than anyone. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You were the Catachan jungle to my Catachan jungle fighters.
Now we all know, they're going to release at least 5 new Space Marine models before they ever deign to give us anything else.
I was going to make a horny joke at the end of this, but I did that last video and I don't want to overuse it. Eventually it just turns into being straight up horny, and you can only have so much of that in your content before it gets weird. But every video I've made has had a little end segment, so instead of just trying to be funny here, I'll just say that I think the coffin of Andy and Laylee is incredibly overrated, and no one would play it if one of the characters wasn't an anime goth girl. No, I have not played it. No, I don't plan on playing it. I'm just trying to boost engagement by farming angry comments off the kind of person to create a 20-tweet comment thread on Twitter about why the Incest game is a masterpiece. I know it has a 98% positive rating on Steam, and that is entirely meaningless because Honeypop has a 96% positive rating on Steam. I have seen what makes you cheer, and your boos mean nothing because of it. Videos...
Alright, war pugs. So, Catachan. I wasn't introduced to Catachan until far, far later than I really should have been. I knew about Slime Marble, I just didn't know anything about Catachan. Catachan is just one of those worlds where you wonder why anybody still lives there voluntarily, and then you realize 40k is a hellhole. And welcome to it. Warpugs, I'm gonna wrap up because I've been talking for about 20 minutes longer than I wanted to. if you notice that I've been making messed up faces, I'm trying not to sneeze constantly. I'm just trying not to sneeze constantly, and it's not helping. I think I need to do a lore video on the Morty and Iron Guard, because while people do, there's a lot of things to be said about the Cadians, Catachan, Talon Jungle, it's a Talon Desert, Talon. I'm so bad today. The Morty and Iron Guard is my personal favorite, and they have been for a very long time. So I think I might need to do a lore video about them if we're going to be taking a look at regiments of renown. But until then, Warpugs, I will catch you guys next time. Check the links in the description below. Leave a comment, subscribe. And I hope that you celebrate soon. I'll catch you guys next time.